I woke before dawn because the light through my curtains looked like milk spilling across the wall. It was one of those mornings that feels soft and fragile when the world is too quiet and you are afraid your breath might break it. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to the ticking of the old clock on the shelf. Today I would see her, or at least I thought I would. The basket waited on the counter. I had polished each apple until it shone like glass. They were small and imperfect, the kind that grow on old trees that no one bothers to trim. She used to like them that way. When she was little, she would say they tasted better because they were honest. I smiled at the memory, then felt it slip away like steam. I wrapped a scarf around my neck, though the morning was already warm, and stepped outside. The air smelled of wet concrete and grass. My hands trembled a little as I locked the door. Every part of me wanted to turn back. But something heavier than fear kept me walking. Maybe love, maybe habit. The bus ride into the city felt longer than usual. I sat near the window and watched the streets blur into cleaner lines, the houses growing taller and richer the closer we got to the hills. I wondered if she ever looked out from her window and saw buses like this one passing by, full of people she used to be. When I got off, the pavement was white stone, too smooth for my old shoes. The address was easy to find. Everyone knew the house with the mirrored gates. It was in the magazines last year, a masterpiece of glass and steel. I stood there for a while before pressing the intercom. My reflection stared back, older, smaller, softer than I remembered. The gate clicked open. I walked up the driveway slowly, my pulse loud in my ears. The basket felt heavier with every step. The garden smelled of lemon trees and new money. I could hear music faintly from inside, something classical, elegant, detached. At the door I hesitated. What would I say if she opened it? "Hello, I missed you." Or would I just hand her the apples and leave before she had time to remember my name? I reached for the bell anyway. The sound echoed through the house. A moment later the door opened and she appeared. For a second I thought I had knocked on the wrong house. The woman standing there looked like a photograph, flawless skin, sharp suit, hair pinned in perfect order. But then she spoke, and the sound of her voice collapsed the years between us. "What are you doing here?" Her tone wasn't angry, not yet. It was careful, like someone trying to control a flame. I tried to smile. "I was in the neighborhood, I thought I'd stop by." Her eyes darted past me to the street, then back to the basket in my hands. "You can't be here, Nia, not now. I won't stay long, I brought you something." She didn't even look at it. "Do you know who's inside? Investors, reporters. This is a launch event. You showing up like this, it could ruin everything." Ruined. That word again. I felt it sink somewhere deep in my chest. I wanted to tell her I didn't come to ruin anything, that all I wanted was to see her face without a screen between us. But the words tangled on my tongue. "Please," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "just leave. I'll call you later." I nodded, though I knew she wouldn't. I started to turn away, and maybe that would have been the end of it, but the heel of my shoe slipped on the marble step. The basket tilted. She reached out instinctively, but instead of helping me, she shoved the basket aside, as if the sight of it terrified her more than the thought of me falling. The apples spilled across the ground, rolling and bouncing down the steps like small red planets. The sound was sharp and final. I tried to steady myself, but my knee hit the edge of the stone and pain shot up my leg. I watched one apple roll all the way to the street, split open, and bleed juice into the dust. She froze. For a heartbeat, I thought she might reach for me. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder toward the open hallway where voices and laughter drifted from somewhere inside. When she looked back at me, her face was unreadable. "I told you not to come," she said quietly, then stepped back and closed the door. The click of the latch was louder than the fall. I sat there for a long time. My palms were scraped, my skirt torn at the hem. The sun had begun to climb, spreading light over the pale stone until it glowed almost too bright to look at. I gathered what was left of the apples, though most were bruised. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe because picking things up was something I had always done. A man across the street paused beside his delivery van. He looked at me, hesitated, then quickly turned away. People always look away from the kind of pain that makes no sound. When I finally stood, my legs trembled. I held the basket against my chest and walked back down the long driveway. Behind me, the music grew louder, spilling out through the half-open windows. The laughter rose and fell like wind. It was a celebration, and I had no part in it. At the gate, I turned once more. Through the glass panels, I could see her again, moving gracefully through a crowd of elegant people, smiling as if her whole life had been written for her. For a brief second, she looked toward the window. Our eyes didn't meet, but something inside me shifted. I realized she wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of what I reminded her of. I walked away. The basket bumped against my hip as I went downhill. The apples knocked softly together like a heartbeat that refused to die. By the time I reached the bus stop, my knee was stiff and my shoulder ached. I sat on the bench and watched cars glide by, each one a small world I would never belong to. The city hummed with noise, but I felt invisible. When the bus finally came, the driver gave me a quick glance in the mirror but didn't ask if I was all right. I sat near the back, pressed my forehead against the glass, and let the city slide away. I thought about what she had said. Investors, reporters, people who believed she came from nothing. That word again, nothing. As if everything I had done to raise her had vanished into thin air. The bus rattled through the old part of town. I watched familiar buildings pass by, the bakery where she bought her first birthday cake with her own money, the park where we used to feed ducks when I still had Sundays off. The memories felt like ghosts riding alongside me. By the time I reached my stop, the sun was high. The air was hot and heavy, smelling of asphalt and dust. I limped home, each step a reminder of her hands pushing me away. Inside the apartment, the air was still. I set the basket on the counter and washed my hands. Blood had dried along my palm in thin brown lines. I let the water run until it turned cold. For a long while I just stood there, staring at the bruised fruit. They looked almost human, each one marked by the fall. I thought about throwing them away but couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I lined them up on the windowsill. They caught the light and glowed red like hearts still beating. That was when I realized how quiet my life had become. No phone calls, no footsteps except my own. The silence wrapped around me like an old coat, heavy and familiar. I picked up one apple, turned it in my hand, and whispered to the empty room. She used to love these. The room didn't answer. I made tea because that is what you do when you do not know what else to do. The kettle hissed and clicked and filled the kitchen with a little cloud of breath. I held the warm mug against my sore palms and waited for the ache to settle. Steam rose and disappeared. It felt like a lesson about everything I had tried to hold on to. The apples on the windowsill looked calmer now. The bruises were turning a deeper shade, almost pretty if I did not think about how they got there. I picked the smallest one and set it on a plate. I peeled it carefully the way she used to ask me to when she was a girl. One long ribbon if you can, Mama. It was always a game. I tried not to break the peel. My fingers remembered the old rhythm even as the cut on my palm stung with each turn of the knife. The peel fell in a soft coil, and for a moment the kitchen smelled like our old afternoons when homework was still simple and the future was a clean page waiting to be written. I ate slowly. The apple was tart and sweet in the same bite. It did not fix anything, but it reminded me that simple things can still be good even when the larger story has turned bitter. I placed the peel beside the sink and rinsed the plate. The water ran pink at first, then clear. Outside, the day settled into a heavy quiet. My building faces a narrow alley where light arrives late and leaves early, so I keep a small lamp on near the window to fool my eyes into thinking the sun might linger. Across the alley, a cat slept on a sill with one paw hanging down like a tired glove. Somewhere a radio murmured. A woman laughed and then fell silent. Doors opened and closed. Life went on without asking my permission. I thought about calling someone. I scrolled through my phone and realized there were fewer names than there used to be. Work friends had faded when I retired from the night shifts. Church ladies had moved away. Neighbors came and went with the seasons. I stopped on the number saved as June from the second floor and almost pressed it. June is kind in the practical way that matters. She brings soup when you are sick and waters plants when you travel and does not ask for explanations you do not have. But I did not want to hear my own story out loud, not yet. Saying it would make it more solid, more sharp. I put the phone down and opened the window. Air slid in smelling of rain that had not arrived. My knee pulsed where it hit the step. I looked at the bruise already rising under the skin and thought of all the smaller bruises that never showed. The ones you carry in your thoughts, on your tongue, behind your ribs. The ones you learn to hide because you still have to go to work, still have to smile at strangers, still have to pay the electric bill before the second notice comes. A siren wailed in the distance and then faded. Somewhere a child cried, then hiccuped, then quieted. The world is full of endings that are not really endings. I told myself I had finished something today. I had walked to her gate. I had knocked. I had looked at her face and it had not killed me. That felt like a kind of ending, but the ache in my chest said otherwise. I took a cloth from the drawer and cleaned the little streaks of blood off the counter. This is what I know how to do. I clean, I mend, I put things back in their places. I learned that in hospital hallways where mess arrives without warning and someone has to make it safe again. I cleaned rooms where mothers whispered to sleeping children because the machines were too loud to hear hope. I cleaned rooms where silence outlived the patient by hours. If I had a way to clean a life, I would have done that too. In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my fingertips to my eyelids until sparks bloomed in the dark. I tried to pray, but the words felt crooked. I tried to count breaths, but lost count. I thought of her when she was 6 and too brave for her small body. She would jump from the second step of the porch and expect to land in my arms. I always caught her. There were so many ways the world could hurt her even then, but I believed I could stand between her and the worst of it if I just kept moving. It is funny what we promise without knowing how big the world can be. I lay down and listened to the building settle. Pipes tapped and sighed. The refrigerator hummed. A car door slammed outside and a voice said, "See you tomorrow." Sleep would not come. I kept seeing the way she looked past me, the way she closed the door with the careful certainty of someone who has closed many doors and learned not to regret it. I tried to picture her as a newborn to soften the edge of the memory. I tried to remember the weight of her when she fit in the crook of my arm and smelled like milk and lotion. The memory worked for a breath or two. Then the present came back. I got up and went to the kitchen again. I poured a glass of water and drank it slowly. On the wall near the pantry hangs a small calendar with a photograph of a lighthouse. I have not turned the page in 2 months. The torn edges of the old month curl like paper petals. I stood there looking at the lighthouse and thought about sailors trusting light they cannot touch. You follow it because it is there, not because it promises to save you. Maybe mothers are lighthouses know one thanks until the ship is too far inland to see the shore. From the cupboard, I took a small tin box where I keep things that matter too much to leave lying around. The lid sticks unless you find the right angle. Inside are paper bits of a life, receipts from years that hurt, a button from her coat that fell off the winter she was 7, a photo of her at a school recital holding a cardboard star, a letter folded until the paper turned soft as cloth. I did not open the letter. Not yet. I stroked the edge of it with my thumb and put the box back. Memory has teeth. Today I had already bled enough. The clock said almost evening when someone knocked on my door. I froze for a second, stupid with hope, then angry with myself for being stupid. Hope is a muscle that keeps moving even when it should rest. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was June from the second floor with a bowl in her hands and worry in her eyes. I opened the door and she stepped in without waiting. She is that kind of friend. She set down the bowl on the counter and looked at my hands. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. I slipped my hands behind my back like a child caught stealing candy. "I am fine," I said, then winced because the word rubbed like a rough seam. She took my left hand gently anyway and turned it palm up. Her face changed when she saw the scraped skin and the way I flinched. "Did you fall?" she asked. "Do you want me to take you to urgent care?" I shook my head. "It is just a scrape. The kind that looks worse than it is." She tilted her head the way she does when she does not believe me but chooses to be kind. "I made soup," she said instead. "You should eat." We sat at the little table with the chipped edge. The soup was hot and fragrant with thyme. She told me about her day watching her niece, about the way the girl had discovered how to whistle and would not stop. I listened. I nodded at the right places. I let the normal hum of her voice wrap around me like a blanket that had not yet learned my shape. After a while, she said it without saying it. "I saw the news about that big event up in the hills, the fancy one. Your girl is doing so well," she said carefully. I felt something inside me tilt. "Yes," I said, "she is." June reached across the table and squeezed my wrist. "You can tell me if you want. You do not have to if you do not." "There is not much to tell," I said. And that was true and also a lie. I could have told her about the white suit and the red lipstick and the way a door can sound like a verdict. I could have told her about the apples rolling like lost thoughts. I could have told her about how a mother can sit on a step and feel the world grow taller than her. But I did not. When June left, she took my empty bowl and promised to come by tomorrow. She is generous with small promises, the kind that keep a day from collapsing. I locked the door and leaned my forehead against it. The wood was cool and real. I breathed in and out until my ribs stopped shaking. Night came gently. The alley turned blue and then black. I closed the window and pulled the curtains tight. I stood in the dark for a moment and listened to the building breathe. Then I lit the small lamp again, because sometimes a small light is easier to be alone with than a big one. I went back to the windowsill and touched each apple another time as if counting blessings. When I reached the smallest one, I pressed my thumb against the bruise and felt the skin give. It will not last until morning, I thought. Some fruit is like a secret. You either eat it now or lose it forever. I took the small notebook from the drawer and wrote a few lines in the way I do when sleep refuses to come. Today, I went to a house made of glass and learned how easy it is to disappear. Today, I picked up what I could. Today, I was not brave, and also I was. The words looked different under the lamp, less complicated than the feeling, but that is the nature of words. They straighten what life twists. When I finally lay down again, the sheets were cool. I closed my eyes and tried to give myself to the dark the way you hand a child to a careful nurse. Here you go, be gentle. I pictured the apples in a row, the peel in a spiral, the way her small fingers once caught the last sweet piece with triumph. I pictured a door opening in the morning. Not the one with the mirrored glass, a different door, one I could still choose. Sleep came like a kind stranger who does not ask questions. It placed a hand on my forehead and said rest. The house settled around me. Somewhere a faucet dripped. Somewhere a car idled and then moved on. The city kept breathing its slow, heavy breath. And at last, for a few hours, I did not think about gates or marble steps or the sound a door makes when a daughter decides she does not have a mother. When I woke in the first blue of morning, the world felt slightly rearranged, like a room after you have cleaned it without moving the furniture. The pain in my knee had dulled to a stubborn complaint. I went to the kitchen and found that one of the apples had fallen from the sill during the night. It rested on the counter with a new bruise, as if the fruit had been dreaming of gravity and woke surprised to find it true. I smiled despite myself. I cut away the dark part and ate the rest over the sink while the city stretched and yawned. I told myself I would not think about going back. I told myself I had done enough for one lifetime, but love is a tide. It withdraws to gather itself and then returns with another reach. I washed the knife and set it to dry. I pressed my palm flat on the cool counter and felt the steadiness of the stone. Somewhere far away, a crowd would be forming again. Somewhere flashbulbs would be warming up for another bright noon. Somewhere a woman in a white suit would be rehearsing a smile in a mirror. And here, in a small kitchen that smelled of tea and apples, a mother breathed and decided to keep standing. I did not know then that by nightfall the world would bring her face back to me in the most public way possible. I did not know that the story she told the cameras would include a mother who was no longer living. All I knew was the taste of the last bite of apple and the quiet throb of a bruise that had learned my name. I rinsed the plate. I opened the curtains. The morning came in, cautious and bright, and I let it touch my hands. Morning light spilled across the kitchen table, sliding over the apples like a slow tide. I had left the television on through the night, its blue glow pulsing in the dark like a heartbeat that refused to rest. When the announcer's voice grew clear again, I lifted my head from my folded arms. There she was. Evelyn stood in front of a wall of white flowers. Cameras blinked around her like a storm of stars. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, faces hungry. My daughter looked untouchable, carved out of light and discipline. And beside her, a stranger held her hand. The woman's hair was silver and soft, her smile careful. When the host introduced her as Evelyn's mother, the audience gasped and applauded. The stranger squeezed Evelyn's fingers and nodded modestly. I stared until the room blurred. For a moment I thought I had misheard. Perhaps she had said mentor, not mother. But then the subtitle appeared on the screen, Evelyn Montgomery and her mother Margaret Montgomery. My name is Nia. Evelyn spoke into the microphone. Everything I am, I owe to my mother. She taught me to fight for my dreams. She taught me that love means never giving up. The crowd clapped again. The woman beside her dabbed her eyes with a tissue. It looked perfect, scripted, sincere enough to win awards. I wanted to turn the television off, but my hand froze on the remote. My breath came too fast, like I had been running. I listened as Evelyn told the story of losing her real mother at 6 years old, of learning to survive alone, of being adopted by this angelic woman who had shown her kindness. Each sentence was a nail closing the lid on my life. I whispered at the screen, "You were never alone." The words came out cracked, like they belonged to someone else. The neighbor upstairs flushed the toilet. Water rushed through the pipes in the wall. The ordinary sound reminded me that the world was still turning, indifferent to small heartbreaks happening behind closed doors. I turned the volume down until her voice became only movement on her lips. I studied her face, trying to find a trace of the child I had known. She still had the same dimples when she smiled, though now they looked rehearsed. Her eyes were darker, sharper. Success had polished her like a jewel, but something human had been scraped away in the process. The woman beside her leaned in and kissed her cheek. Flashbulbs went off. I blinked and saw the afterimages dancing across the room like ghosts. I switched the television off and sat there in the quiet. My reflection stared back at me from the black screen, older, faded, a shadow of the story that had just played out in color. I pressed my palms together to stop the shaking. In the drawer by the sink, there was a stack of unpaid bills, a grocery list, and a small photograph in a cracked frame. Evelyn at 16, her head tilted back in laughter, sunlight burning in her hair. I had taken that picture the summer she graduated high school. We had eaten cheap sandwiches in the park and talked about her future. She wanted to study design. She said one day she would build something beautiful enough for people to live inside it. I had believed her. I set the photo on the table beside the cold mug of tea. The contrast was almost funny. The girl in the picture dreaming of light, and the woman on television surrounded by it but unable to see her own mother through the glare. The doorbell rang then. The sound made me jump. I hesitated before answering. It was the mail carrier holding a padded envelope. I signed for it and thanked him, my voice hollow. Inside the envelope was a glossy invitation embossed in gold. You are cordially invited to the Gala of Hope, hosted by the Rise Beyond Roots Foundation. The envelope must have been sent weeks ago, before she decided to erase me. The return address was her office. My name was printed correctly, which almost hurt more. I ran my finger over the letters until the ink smudged slightly. I thought of throwing it away but slipped it into the tin box instead, the one that already held too many memories. The rest of the morning moved slowly. I swept the floor, folded laundry, watered the single plant by the window. Ordinary rituals to keep from thinking too hard. Yet everything I touched felt temporary, as if the air itself was watching to see what I would do next. By noon, the air had grown heavy. Thunderclouds gathered over the rooftops, promising rain but delivering only pressure. I made another cup of tea and sat down again. My mind replayed her words on stage. I lost my mother when I was 6. It was almost true. At 6, she had broken her arm falling from the porch steps. I had carried her to the hospital in the middle of the night, my uniform still sticky from the shift I had just finished. She had cried into my shoulder, whispering that it hurt, that she was scared. I told her that brave girls heal faster. She smiled through the tears and called me the strongest woman in the world. The doctor had said she would need a cast for 6 weeks. When we left the hospital, I bought her a red balloon. She had fallen asleep holding the string. The memory sat inside me like a small light flickering in fog. She had loved me once. That was real. The television flickered again as power hiccuped from the storm outside. I reached for the remote but paused when a commercial appeared for her foundation. There she was again, surrounded by smiling children, promising to rebuild communities and fund education. The narrator called her a visionary. I felt a mix of pride and something darker, something I did not want to name. She was helping children now, children without mothers. Maybe that was what hurt most. She had built her success on the shape of the hole she dug in my name. Rain finally began, soft at first, then steady. The sound filled the apartment like static. I leaned my forehead against the window pane. Water streamed down, bending the city lights into trembling ribbons. I whispered her name once just to hear how it felt in my mouth. Evelyn. It still tasted like love and iron. Somewhere deep in me, a voice whispered that I should forgive her, that maybe she had her reasons. People reinvent themselves when they are afraid of being seen too clearly. I had done smaller versions of that myself. But erasing a mother is not the same as changing a name. I stayed by the window until the rain slowed. Across the street, a man in a raincoat carried groceries under his arm. He slipped, then caught himself, then laughed. Life had balance even in clumsiness. Maybe I could learn from that. The air smelled clean after the rain. I closed the window and dried the sill with a towel. The apples were still there, lined up like small suns against the gray sky. I picked one up, the least bruised, and polished it with the corner of my sleeve. In its surface, I could see my reflection faintly, a blur of color and age. For the first time since the morning, I felt a quiet resolve forming underneath the ache. I needed to understand why. Not just the lie, but the fear behind it. What was she running from that she would rather bury her own mother alive than admit the truth? The thought scared me because it meant I would have to step back into her world, the one made of glass and cameras and perfect smiles. I had promised myself I was done chasing after things that did not want me. But love, as I keep learning, is not something you finish. Outside, the clouds broke open and the sun slipped through, timid but determined. The light touched the apples and made them gleam again, red and gold. I watched the colors shift and felt the first small pulse of anger turning into something else, a strange kind of purpose. That was the moment I decided I would not let the story end there. I spent the rest of the afternoon pacing between the kitchen and the window. Every time I tried to sit, my thoughts rose again like restless birds. I opened the tin box and took out the invitation. The card caught the sunlight in a way that made the letters shimmer, as if the event itself were alive and breathing somewhere far above me. I read the words over and over until they blurred into patterns. Then I slipped it back into the box. I was not going to that world again, not yet. When night came, the air turned cool and heavy. I brewed tea and wrapped my hands around the cup. Outside, the city had slowed. The glow of streetlights turned the wet pavement into rivers of gold. From my window, I could see the reflection of my own face overlapping the view, a ghost quietly watching another ghost. I told myself I should sleep, but instead I turned on the television again. The gala coverage had ended, but her face lingered in every replay, every advertisement for her foundation. Reporters called her a beacon of hope. They said she was a reminder that perseverance could lift anyone out of poverty. They never said whose hands had pushed the ladder up for her to climb. I watched until the words lost meaning and the room grew dark except for the soft flicker of light on her perfect smile. I dreamt badly that night. In the dream, she was small again, running through the orchard where the old apple trees leaned toward each other like tired men. She called out for me, laughing. Then suddenly she stopped and looked at me with the same cold eyes she had at the door. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. I woke with my heart hammering and the taste of metal in my mouth. The air in the room felt too thick to breathe. I opened the window and let the dawn creep in, gray and damp. The next morning, I decided to leave the apartment. Sitting inside only made the walls whisper louder. I took the bus to the edge of the city, where the air still smelled of soil and rain. The orchard where we used to pick apples had long been replaced by a small park and a row of narrow houses, but one tree still stood near the path. Its bark was cracked, its branches crooked. I reached up and touched one of the lower limbs. The wood was rough beneath my fingers. I felt the pulse of memory there, quiet but persistent. She had been 5 when we came here last. It was late autumn, the kind of day when the light looks tired but kind. I remembered her climbing that very branch, laughing so hard that the sound filled the whole field. I had told her to come down before she fell. She had stuck her tongue out at me and said, "You worry too much." She had fallen a moment later and scraped her knees. I had carried her home, her tears drying against my neck. That small scar just below her knee, did she still have it? Did she tell people where it came from, or had she turned it into some heroic story about fighting to climb out of hardship? I sat on a bench and watched the morning unfold. Joggers passed, dogs chased each other across the grass, a group of children played tag near the swings. Life goes on whether you are ready or not. I tried to tell myself that was comforting. It was. After a while, I noticed a newspaper on the next bench. On the front page was another photograph of her from the night before, standing under the gala lights with that same woman beside her. Evelyn Montgomery and her mother Margaret win hearts again. The words seemed almost mocking. I folded the paper and placed it beside me. I wondered about the woman. Who was she before this lie? Did she have a family of her own? Did she know what part she was playing in someone else's story? The rain began again, fine and steady. I waited until the park emptied before walking home. My shoes squelched against the pavement. At the corner, I bought a loaf of bread and a small bouquet of daisies from an old vendor. He smiled and wrapped them in newspaper. When he handed them to me, he said, "For someone special." I nodded but did not answer. The lie was easier than explaining that the flowers were for a kitchen that no one visited. Back home, the apartment smelled of damp walls and apples. I set the flowers in a jar and watched the petals tremble. Then I sat at the table and opened my notebook. The page looked accusingly blank. I began to write even though I did not know where the words would go. She looked through me as if I had already been erased. Maybe I was. Maybe this is what being invisible feels like, watching your own life performed by someone else. The pen scratched quietly across the paper. When I finished the sentence, I felt lighter, as if the act of writing had pulled something heavy out of me. I kept going, listing every small memory I could still touch without breaking. The smell of soap on her hair after school, the way she used to hum when she drew, the way she once said that she wanted to build houses that people could live happily in. I filled 3 pages before my hand cramped. I closed the notebook and rested my head on it. The sound of rain filled the room. For the first time in 2 days, my heartbeat slowed. In the evening, June knocked again. She brought more soup and a loaf of bread. She noticed the daisies and smiled. "Pretty," she said. "You have a visitor, too. A young man left something for you downstairs." I frowned. "Who?" She shrugged. "He didn't give a name. Said it was from a friend of your daughter's." My stomach tightened. I followed her down the stairs. On the front step sat a small envelope wrapped in plastic to protect it from the rain. I picked it up carefully. Inside was a business card from a private foundation office, the same logo I had seen on television. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were 5 words: "We should talk about her." I turned the card over in my hands. There was a phone number. For a long moment, I stood there under the dim hallway light, listening to the rain tick against the roof. June touched my shoulder. "You all right?" she asked. "Yes," I said slowly. "I think someone wants to tell me a story." She gave me a small smile and went back upstairs. I stayed where I was, staring at the card. The ink had smudged slightly from the damp, but the number was still legible. I slipped it into my pocket and went inside. That night, I did not turn on the television. I sat at the table with the card beside my cup of tea and tried to imagine the voice on the other end of that phone. Maybe it was one of her colleagues, maybe a journalist, maybe the woman who had replaced me. I did not know which possibility frightened me more. The clock ticked. Midnight came and went. I did not call, but before I went to bed, I whispered into the still air as if it could carry the message to wherever she was sleeping. "I am still here, Evelyn. I am still your mother." The darkness answered only with silence, but somewhere outside the rain began again, soft and insistent, like a promise I was not yet ready to keep. The morning started gray and quiet, the kind of gray that makes you forget what season it is. I moved slowly, careful with my knee, careful with my thoughts. The envelope from last night lay on the table beside the half-empty cup of tea. The business card peeked out like a question I was not ready to answer. I told myself I would decide later after breakfast, after something stronger than courage settled in my stomach. I opened the cupboard and reached for the tin of coffee. When I pulled it down, another object slid out and landed softly on the floor. At first I thought it was just an old receipt. Then I saw the familiar curve of her handwriting. The letter had been folded so many times the edges were thin as lace. My heart stuttered. I carried it to the table and sat down. The paper smelled faintly of dust and years. I hesitated for a long moment before opening it. "Mom, I got in. I can't believe it. They accepted me. I know you said it would happen, but I didn't really think it would. Thank you for staying up late to help me fill out the forms. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't. I'll make you proud. Just you wait. Love, Evie." The handwriting was uneven, full of smudges and excitement. I traced the ink with my finger. The letter must have slipped into one of my cookbooks years ago, tucked there when I was too busy to put it away properly. A small, careless act of fate. I read it again and again until the words blurred. The past opened like a wound I had forgotten to bandage. I could see her then, younger, full of restless light. 10 years old, sitting on the kitchen counter swinging her legs while I peeled apples for pie. She had insisted on learning how to do it herself, but the knife was too big for her hands. Every time the peel broke, she laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. She would eat the longest piece of peel and say it tasted like sunshine. Those afternoons smelled of cinnamon and sugar and the faint hum of the old refrigerator. The radio played softly, a mix of songs and static. I used to hum along and she would join in, off-key but happy. I told her once that when she was born, I dreamed she would fill the house with music. She said, "Maybe I'll fill it with drawings instead." She had always been sure of who she wanted to be. Memory can be kind, but it never stays kind for long. The next image that surfaced was from a hospital corridor, the lights buzzing overhead like insects. I had been mopping the floor, my back aching, the smell of bleach thick in the air. My hands were cracked from the chemicals. At home, she slept in our small apartment, her school books stacked neatly beside her bed. I had whispered a prayer for her every night that she would never have to live a life where her hands hurt from scrubbing other people's floors. Now she lived in glass towers, wearing white suits that cost more than my month's rent. Maybe that was the prayer answered. Maybe I should have been grateful. But as I held the letter, all I could feel was the weight of the space between then and now. I set the letter down gently. The business card beside it seemed to stare back at me. We should talk. About her. I wondered what kind of talk they wanted. The phone sat quietly in its cradle on the counter. I lifted the receiver, listened to the hum of the line, and then put it back. I was afraid of the sound of truth on the other end. To steady myself, I began cleaning. I washed the dishes from breakfast, wiped the counter, and swept the floor. Cleaning is a kind of thinking that doesn't require permission. Each motion brings a small order to a world that keeps unraveling. When I finished, I sat again at the table and looked at the letter. The handwriting danced in the sunlight that had begun to creep through the clouds. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to say her name out loud in an empty room. Evelyn. It came out softer than I expected, as if the name itself was afraid of being used. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, then slipped it into the tin box. I told myself I would not open it again. That was a lie I already knew I would break. In the afternoon, June knocked again. She carried a basket of laundry, her arms full of color. I let her in. "You look better today," she said. I nodded. "Maybe I found something this morning." "Good something or bad something? Both," I said. She smiled faintly. "That's usually how life works." I made coffee and we sat by the window. She talked about her niece again, about school plays and missing homework. I listened, grateful for her voice filling the air. After a while, she noticed the envelope on the table. "Old letter?" she asked. "From my daughter," I said quietly. "From before." She nodded and didn't press. June has a gift for silence that isn't heavy. When she left, the room felt too still. I stared at the phone again. The card lay where I had left it. The rain had returned, a light tapping that felt almost like encouragement. I picked up the phone, dialed the number slowly, and listened to it ring. A man's voice answered on the third ring. "This is Daniel Clark speaking." My voice trembled. "You left a card for me." A pause, then the sound of papers shifting. "Mrs. Montgomery, I'm glad you called. I work for the foundation." I hesitated. "Which one?" "The Rise Beyond Roots Foundation. I think you know it." I said nothing. He continued, "I wanted to speak to you privately. There are some matters regarding your daughter, things you should know." I gripped the receiver tighter. "What kind of matters?" Another pause, this one longer. When he spoke again, his tone was careful. "Perhaps it's better if we meet tomorrow if you're free. There's a cafe near the library on 5th Street. Noon." I agreed before I had time to think. When I hung up, my hands were shaking again. The rest of the day blurred. I moved through it like a sleepwalker, folding clothes, washing dishes, pretending the call hadn't happened. But my mind kept replaying his voice. Things you should know. By evening, the rain had stopped. The sky was a dull violet. I sat at the window and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. Somewhere below, a couple argued quietly, their words carried up through the open windows. I envied them for having someone to argue with. I took the letter out again and read it under the lamplight. The words still glowed with the warmth of her young faith. She had wanted to make me proud. She had wanted to build something beautiful. Maybe that was still true. Maybe everything I had seen, the lies, the distance, the woman pretending to be her mother, all of it had a reason I could not see yet. Maybe tomorrow I would learn that reason. I set the letter beside my bed before turning off the light. As I lay in the dark, listening to the soft ticking of the clock, I tried to picture her at that exact moment. Was she asleep in a house too clean to dream in? Was she awake, pacing like I was, haunted by the echo of her own choices? I didn't know. All I knew was that the line between us was still there, invisible but real, stretching through years and cities, fragile as thread. And for the first time since she shut the door, I felt it tremble. Morning came soft and pale, the kind of morning that makes you wonder if the world is holding its breath. I barely slept, too busy rehearsing conversations with a man I had never met. When I finally rose, my body felt heavy with a strange mix of fear and something that might have been hope. I dressed carefully, choosing a clean blouse and a skirt without wrinkles. I tied my hair back and looked in the mirror. The face staring back was both familiar and not. Lines ran like quiet rivers along my cheeks. My eyes looked older than I remembered. I told my reflection, "You can do this." The voice did not sound convincing, but it was something. The cafe was a small place near the library, the kind of spot where people read quietly and pretend not to listen to each other. The bell above the door chimed when I entered. The smell of roasted coffee beans wrapped around me. I found a corner table and waited. At exactly noon, a man stepped inside. He was in his mid-30s, dressed neatly but not expensively. His dark hair was slightly messy, as if he had run his hands through it one too many times. When his eyes met mine, he hesitated, then approached. "Mrs. Montgomery?" "Yes." He smiled faintly and extended his hand. "I'm Daniel Clark. Thank you for coming." I shook his hand. His grip was firm but kind. We sat. A waitress brought water and took our orders. I asked for tea. He ordered black coffee. For a moment, the sounds of cups and voices around us filled the space between words. "I wasn't sure you call," he began. "I wasn't sure either," I said. He nodded. "I understand. This isn't easy." I studied him. "You said you work for the foundation." "Yes, I've been there for about 3 years now. I handle community outreach and some internal reports." "What do you want with me?" He glanced at his coffee before answering. "To tell you the truth, or at least part of it." I leaned back, my pulse quickening. "Go on," he sighed. "The story your daughter tells about her past, the one she repeats in interviews at events, it isn't entirely hers. Some of it is true, some of it is rewritten." "I know," I said quietly. "I saw her on television. She claims her mother died when she was 6. But that's not what she tells everyone privately. To some people, she says she was abandoned. To others, that she was taken in by charity. She changes it depending on who she's talking to. The words hit me like cold water. Why are you telling me this? Because she's not just lying to the world, he said. She's lying to herself, and lately things have started to unravel. I frowned. What do you mean? He hesitated, choosing his words. She's been anxious, paranoid even. She thinks someone knows the truth and is going to expose her. She's been acting erratic. I gripped my cup. Why tell me? You could have gone to the press. He shook his head. That's not what I want. I think she needs help. I think you might be the only one who can reach her. The room seemed to tilt slightly. For a long moment, I couldn't find my voice. She doesn't want me, I whispered. She made that clear. Maybe not consciously, he said, but she talks about you sometimes. Not by name, but I can tell. She'll mention an apple pie she used to love, or she'll hum a tune under her breath when she's stressed. I looked it up once. It's an old lullaby. My throat tightened. She still remembers that? She does, he said softly. Whatever happened between you, it's still there. The tea had gone cold. I stirred it just to keep my hands busy. You said things are unraveling. What exactly is happening? He lowered his voice. There are rumors. A journalist has been asking questions about her early life, about inconsistencies in her story. If the truth comes out the wrong way, it could destroy everything she's built. And you think I should protect her? I think you should decide whether to. I'm not asking you to lie. I just thought you should know before someone else finds you and twists the story their way. I sat in silence, feeling the hum of the cafe around me. Somewhere behind us, a spoon clinked against a cup. A woman laughed. The world continued, indifferent to our small storm. Finally, I said, she replaced me, on stage, in front of everyone. Why should I help her now? He looked at me for a long time. Because she's still your daughter. The words landed with a weight that made me want to cry. I looked out the window instead. The street outside was busy with people hurrying through their noon routines. It all looked so normal. After a moment, I asked, why do you care? He smiled sadly. Because she reminds me of my sister. She burned herself out trying to be someone else. I watched her lose everything before she realized it wasn't worth it. We sat quietly after that. When the check came, he paid despite my protest. As he stood to leave, he said, if you decide to talk to her, do it soon. She's leaving for another conference next week. And Mrs. Montgomery? Yes. Be careful. Not everyone around her wants the truth to come out. He left before I could ask what he meant. I stayed there long after he was gone, staring into the cold tea. His words echoed in my head, be careful. The idea that danger could be hiding behind my daughter's success felt absurd, and yet something inside me believed it. When I finally stood to leave, my legs felt unsteady. I walked slowly toward the bus stop, clutching my bag close to my chest. The afternoon sun had broken through the clouds, sharp and bright. It made the city look cleaner than it really was. On the ride home, I kept replaying the conversation. The way he had looked at me when he said she still remembered the lullaby, the worry in his eyes when he warned me, the certainty in his voice when he said she needed help. By the time I reached my stop, I had made a decision. I would go to her again, not as a ghost or an accusation, but as a mother. One last time, I would look into her eyes and see what truth was left in them. At home, I opened the tin box and took out the letter again. The paper was fragile, the ink faded. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my purse. If I was going to see her, I wanted her to remember who she had been before the world turned her into someone else. As night fell, the city lights blinked on one by one, a field of distant stars. I stood by the window and whispered to my reflection, tomorrow. The word hung in the air, trembling but alive. I did not know then that tomorrow would bring not answers, but something far more dangerous. I did not know that the truth waiting behind her perfect smile had teeth. All I knew was that the line between past and present had begun to fray, and somewhere in that unraveling, my daughter was calling for me without knowing it. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Evelyn's face the way it had looked in the cafe window that day years ago, laughing at something I had said. She must have been 15 then. I kept asking myself what I had missed, what small moment had been the beginning of her turning away. By dawn, the decision was already made. I would go to her office. I would tell her I wanted to talk, not as the ghost she pretended I was, but as the woman who had once held her through every sickness, every heartbreak, every dream. The morning air was cold and clear. I dressed simply, the same skirt as yesterday, a cardigan that smelled faintly of soap. In my purse, the folded letter waited like a small heartbeat. I took the early bus downtown. The city was still waking. Workers swept the sidewalks, cafes rolled up their shutters, and the smell of fresh bread drifted out into the chill. Her office building towered above everything around it, all glass and light. I stood across the street and looked up. The logo of her foundation gleamed from the top floor, "Rise Beyond Roots." The word seemed almost cruel now, as if she had grown wings only by cutting the roots that once held her. Inside, the lobby was a cavern of marble and metal. The receptionist looked at me with polite suspicion when I asked for Evelyn. I gave my name and said it slowly. "Tell her it's Nia Montgomery." The woman typed something, frowned slightly at her screen, and said, "I'll check if she's available." She picked up the phone and spoke in a low voice. I waited, trying not to notice the people passing by in sleek clothes and shiny shoes, each one belonging to a world that had forgotten women like me. When the receptionist hung up, her smile was tight. "Ms. Montgomery is in a meeting. She asked me to take a message." I nodded, though my heart fell. "Please tell her I found her letter. She'll understand." The receptionist hesitated, then wrote it down. I turned to leave, but a familiar voice called from behind me. "Mrs. Montgomery?" It was Daniel. He looked slightly out of breath, as if he had hurried to catch me. "I didn't expect you to come so soon," he said. "I wasn't going to wait," I answered. He glanced toward the receptionist and lowered his voice. "Maybe we shouldn't talk here. Let's walk." We stepped back out into the sunlight. The street was busy now, the rush of morning traffic humming like an argument in the air. "She really isn't here?" I asked. "She's upstairs," Daniel said. "But trust me, this isn't the right moment." There's tension in the office. Rumors, people asking about her past. Because of the journalist? Yes, he's persistent, and someone leaked a document, an old application form from a scholarship program that listed her family details. It says her mother's name was Nia Montgomery. I stopped walking. Then she must know it's coming out. She does, that's why she's panicking. She's trying to control the story before someone else does, but the more she hides, the worse it looks. I felt a dull ache spread through my chest. What are they going to do? She's meeting with her board today to discuss damage control. If she finds out you've been seen near the building, he hesitated. She might see it as an attack. "I'm her mother," I said quietly, "not her enemy." He looked at me with a sadness that told me he understood the difference, but doubted she still did. We walked toward a small park a few blocks away. The benches were wet from last night's rain. We sat, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "I need to ask you something," I said finally. "Why do you think she lied about me being dead?" He thought about it before answering. "I think she wanted to protect herself. When she started rising in this world, the story of a dead mother sounded noble, tragic. It made people feel for her. Maybe at first it was a small lie, easy to control, but the higher she climbed, the bigger it became." I nodded slowly. "And Margaret?" He sighed. "A volunteer at one of her early charity events. She looked the part, sounded gentle. Evelyn brought her to interviews once and the media loved it. They built the myth together, even if neither meant to at first." The betrayal felt like an old wound reopened. "Does Margaret know the truth?" "She does, but she's loyal to Evelyn, maybe too loyal. I've tried talking to her once and she said only one thing: we all play the roles we're given." The words sent a chill through me. Daniel glanced at his watch. "I have to get back before someone notices I'm gone. Be careful, Mrs. Montgomery. If she feels cornered, I don't know what she'll do." I thanked him and watched as he walked away, disappearing into the crowd. For a long time I sat there, watching the wind move through the trees. Everything in me ached to go upstairs to see her, to force the truth into the open. But Daniel's warning echoed in my head. She was not ready. Maybe neither was I. Instead, I decided to wait outside the building to see her just once before I spoke. I crossed back to the sidewalk and stood across the street again. The hours passed slowly. People came and went. The sun moved higher, the light turning harsh. My legs grew tired, but I stayed. Then near 2 o'clock she appeared. Evelyn stepped out of the revolving door, phone pressed to her ear, her movements sharp, impatient. A man in a gray suit followed her, speaking quickly. She didn't listen. Her face was tense, her jaw set. I watched her pace, stop, then laugh suddenly, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to call out her name, but the words stuck in my throat. I wanted her to see me, to recognize me, to feel even a flicker of the bond that used to live between us. She turned once, scanning the street. Her eyes passed over me, hesitated for a heartbeat, then moved on. It was enough. She had seen me. Her expression changed, shock, then confusion, then something darker. She said something to the man beside her, handed him the phone, and began walking toward me. My breath caught. The crowd shifted around her, the noise of the city dimming to a dull hum. When she reached me, she stopped an arm's length away. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low, almost trembling. "I came to talk," I said, "just to talk." Her eyes flicked around, checking who might be watching. "You can't just show up like this. Do you have any idea what people would think if they saw us together?" I don't care what they think, I said softly. You're my daughter. Not here, she whispered harshly. Not now. Then when? She hesitated, then exhaled sharply. Tonight, 7 o'clock, my house, but if anyone asks, you haven't seen me. Understand? I nodded. She turned to go, then looked back. For the briefest moment, something human flickered behind her polished mask. Please don't ruin everything I've built, she said, and then she was gone, swallowed by the glass tower once more. I stood there for a long time, the words echoing in my ears. Please don't ruin everything I've built. The thing she had built was her life, and I, it seemed, had become the threat she feared most, the truth. As I walked back toward the bus stop, the folded letter pressed warm against my chest, I felt the tremor of something shifting inside me. Tonight, I would step back into her world. I didn't know yet that by the time the night ended, one of us would have to lose everything to keep the other alive. The rest of the day moved in fragments. I cleaned the kitchen twice, though it was already spotless. I folded towels, then unfolded them again. The clock seemed to tick louder with every hour. By late afternoon, the light outside turned golden and long, spilling over the rooftops like honey. The sight of it made me think of her hair when she was little, how it caught the sunlight whenever she ran through the yard. I almost smiled, and then the weight of the coming evening settled over me again. At 6, I began to get ready. I chose the same blouse and cardigan, simple and soft. I brushed my hair until it lay smooth. In the mirror, my reflection looked tired but determined. I slipped the folded letter into my purse and touched it once for luck. The air outside was still warm but beginning to cool. I walked to the bus stop through streets humming with rush hour. People passed carrying briefcases, phones, and take-out coffee cups, all moving fast, certain of their destinations. I envied them that certainty. By the time the bus reached her neighborhood, the sky had deepened to a dusky blue. The houses on the hill glowed with light behind their wide windows. Her gate opened the same way it had before, silent and mechanical, as if it recognized me despite her wishes. I walked up the driveway slowly, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I reached the door, I paused. The memory of the last time, the push, the fall, the rolling apples, flashed behind my eyes. I almost turned away. Then I remembered Daniel's voice telling me she needed help. I lifted my hand and knocked. The door opened before my knuckles touched it a second time. Evelyn stood there. She had changed out of her office clothes and was wearing a loose cream blouse, her hair tied back. The makeup was gone, and the bare face beneath it looked younger, more fragile. She did not invite me in at once. She studied me as if I were a stranger at her door. Then she stepped aside. "Come in," she said quietly. The house was dim, the lights low. Somewhere deeper inside, music played, soft piano, something unfamiliar. I followed her into the living room. It smelled faintly of citrus and perfume. On the table stood a half-empty glass of wine. She gestured toward the couch. I sat, keeping my purse in my lap. "You shouldn't have come to the office," she said after a moment. "Someone could have seen you." "I only wanted to talk." "Talk about what?" "About how you've decided to show up now, after all this time." I looked at her carefully. "I never went anywhere, Evelyn, you did." Her lips pressed together. She poured herself another glass of wine but did not offer me any. "You don't understand what it's like. The expectations, the people watching every move. You say one wrong word and they tear everything apart. So you decided to erase me," I said softly. She flinched but didn't deny it. "I had to survive." No one would have taken me seriously if they knew I came from a janitor's house in a neighborhood that doesn't even exist on maps anymore. You don't know what it's like to sit in a room full of people who think your kind belongs in the kitchen. I changed the story because I had to. And killing me in that story helped? Her eyes shone wet in the lamplight. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Margaret was just supposed to stand next to me once. The media made it bigger. They called her my mother, and I didn't correct them. After that, it was too late. Too late for the truth? She sank into the armchair opposite me, rubbing her temple. "You think I haven't felt guilty? Every day I tell myself I'll fix it, and then something new happens, a sponsorship, a speech, a meeting, and I tell myself to wait one more week. But the lie keeps growing. It's bigger than me now." I wanted to be angry, but seeing her like this, small and lost in her own home, softened something in me. I reached into my purse and took out the letter. I placed it on the table between us. "You wrote this when you were 17, I said. "You said you'd make me proud. You already had." She stared at the letter as if it were an artifact from another life. Her fingers trembled when she picked it up. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Where did you find it?" "In the old cookbook." "Out when I was cleaning." She folded the paper carefully and held it against her chest. "I meant every word." "I know." The silence stretched between us, fragile as glass. Then she said, "They're going to find out soon. About you, about everything. There's a journalist who won't stop digging." I heard. Her eyes met mine, full of something close to panic. "If they find out the truth, everything I've worked for will collapse. The foundation, the donors, everything." "What do you want me to do, Evelyn?" She hesitated, then looked away. "Nothing, just stay quiet, let it pass." "I can't do that." "Why not?" Her voice rose, sharp. "You owe me that much. You think I don't remember what it was like watching you come home every night exhausted, smelling like bleach? You wanted me to have more, didn't you? This is what more looks like." "This isn't more," I said. "This is you hiding from the part of yourself that could still love." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a long time she didn't answer. Then in a voice so small it almost disappeared, she said, "You don't understand what it's like to be ashamed of where you came from." I leaned forward. "You think I do? I scrubbed floors so you could have choices. I lied to landlords about my job because I didn't want them to look down on you. I know shame, Evelyn, but I also know it only wins when you let it." She looked away, her shoulders shaking. The sound that escaped her was not quite a sob, but close. "I don't know how to fix this." "Start by telling the truth," I said. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's not that simple. People depend on me now. If I fall, they fall too. Then let them see that you're human. That might save them more than the lie ever will." The air between us changed then. I could see her breathing slow, the stiffness in her shoulders easing just a little. She looked at me as if seeing not the ghost she had made of me, but the woman who had once taught her how to tie her shoes, how to spell her name. The look broke my heart. We sat in silence until the clock on the wall chimed 7:30. Then she spoke again, her voice steady but distant. "There's something I need to show you. Wait here." She left the room and walked down the hallway. I heard a drawer open, the faint sound of paper shuffling. When she returned, she was holding a thin folder. She placed it on the table next to the letter. "What's this?" I asked. "Proof. Documents. The original records from the scholarship I applied for. The ones that list you as my mother. I kept them all these years." I opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of forms, letters, and photographs. My name appeared again and again beside hers. It was like holding evidence that I had existed. "I don't know why I kept them," she said. "Maybe part of me knew I'd need them someday. Maybe part of me hoped you'd come back." "I never left," I whispered. She looked at me, her mouth trembling. "What should I do?" I closed the folder gently. "Tell the truth yourself before someone else does." "I'm scared." "I know." We stayed like that for a long time, two women sitting at opposite ends of a table crowded with ghosts. When I finally rose to leave, she didn't stop me. She walked me to the door and stood there as I stepped out into the cool night air. "I'll call you," she said. "I'll be waiting." The moon was rising over the hill as I walked back toward the bus stop. My hands shook, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time, the door between us had opened, even if just a crack. Behind me, her house glowed softly in the dark. I didn't see her standing at the window watching me go, the letter still in her hand, her reflection merging with mine in the glass. That night, I went to sleep believing things might finally begin to heal. I was wrong. When I woke the next morning, the air felt strange. Heavy, as if the world was holding something back. The first thing I did was check my phone, though I didn't expect any messages. There was one, an unknown number. I did it. That was all it said. No name, no explanation, but I knew. My heart skipped. She had told the truth. For a moment, I couldn't move. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the words. Then I rose quickly, nearly knocking over the glass of water by the nightstand. The city outside was already buzzing, cars honking, people shouting, life carrying on. But something had changed. I turned on the television. Every news channel showed her face. Evelyn Montgomery, the visionary behind the rise beyond Roots Foundation, was trending across every headline. The anchor's voice was calm but charged with curiosity. In a surprising turn, Ms. Montgomery has revealed that her mother, long believed to have passed away, is in fact alive. The screen flashed to a clip from a press conference. Evelyn stood at a podium, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. She looked smaller than she had before, stripped of her armor. "For years," she said, "I told a story that wasn't mine to tell. I said my mother had died when I was 6. The truth is, she worked every day of her life to give me everything I have. Her name is Nia Montgomery, and I am who I am because of her." The room erupted in questions. Flashbulbs popped. Her voice shook slightly as she went on. "I lied out of fear. Fear that my background would make me seem less worthy. But I understand now that strength isn't about what we hide, it's about what we carry with us." My hands were shaking. I pressed them to my mouth and tried to breathe. The announcer spoke again, his tone smooth and speculative. "Public response has been mixed. Some praise her courage, others accuse her of manipulation." Of course they would. The world loves confession only when it's convenient. The phone rang then, making me jump. It was June. Nia, have you seen the news? Yes. She told the truth. She said your name? I know. Oh, honey, her voice softened. You must be so proud. I am, I said, but even as I said it, something in me hesitated. Pride and worry tangled together in my chest, because if she had told the truth, then someone powerful would not be happy. Later that morning, Daniel called. Did you see it? He asked. Yes. She didn't tell me she was going to do it. None of us knew. She just walked into the press room and said everything. The board is in chaos. Some of them are furious. Others are saying this might actually help her in the long run, but there's one problem. What problem? There's money involved, he said. Donations, grants, millions tied to her story. If the board thinks she committed fraud, they could come after her, or worse. My stomach twisted. What do you mean worse? She's made enemies, Nia. Some of them won't forgive her for embarrassing them. Be careful. Where is she now? She went home after the conference. She turned off her phone. I think she's scared. I didn't need to think. I'm going to her. I'll meet you there, he said. I didn't wait for the bus this time. I took a cab, clutching my bag the whole way. The driver had the radio on and her voice played again through the static. I looked out the window as the city flashed by, crowds gathering, cameras ready. The storm had begun. When I reached the house, the gate was open. Daniel's car was already in the driveway. I hurried up the steps. The front door was unlocked. Evelyn, I called. No answer. The house was too quiet. Daniel appeared from the hallway, his face pale. She's upstairs, he said. She's been crying. I think the press already found her address. We climbed the stairs. At the top, she sat on the edge of her bed, barefoot, still wearing the same clothes from the conference. The letter I'd given her lay open beside her. She looked up when I entered, her eyes swollen and red. They hate me, she whispered. Half the board already resigned. Reporters are outside. They keep calling me a liar who turned honesty into a brand. I sat beside her. You did the right thing. Did I? She laughed bitterly. It doesn't feel like it. Daniel stepped closer. You told the truth, that matters. She shook her head. You don't understand, there are documents, contracts, things tied to the lie. If they decide I defrauded them, I could lose everything. The foundation, the house, all of it. I took her hand. Then let it go, you'll survive. Her grip tightened. It's not just about me anymore. People depend on me. Daniel crouched in front of her. Then fight, but don't fight alone. She looked between us, something breaking and mending inside her all at once. I don't deserve either of you, she whispered. You're wrong, I said. You just forgot who you were. Outside, a car door slammed. Voices murmured near the gate. The sharp click of cameras echoed. Daniel went to the window. They're already here. Evelyn stood abruptly. I can't face them again. Then don't, I said. Let them wait. The truth can survive without your permission now. She looked at me, eyes wet again. I'm so sorry, Mom. It was the first time she had called me that word in years. I felt it like sunlight breaking through cloud. I pulled her into my arms and she held on as if the world might pull us apart again. Downstairs, the phone began to ring. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Daniel went to answer it. When he returned, his expression had changed. That was the foundation's lawyer, he said. They want her in tomorrow morning. They're threatening to freeze the accounts until they review everything. Evelyn wiped her eyes. Let them, I have nothing left to hide. Daniel nodded slowly, though his eyes were wary. Still, be careful. When people's money is on the line, the truth doesn't always matter. After he left, we sat together in silence. The house felt smaller, the walls closer. Outside, the reporters' voices faded into the night. You should stay here tonight, she said finally. It's not safe for you to walk alone. I'll stay, I said. She smiled weakly. It feels strange having you here again, like the house knows who you are even if I tried to forget. We didn't talk much after that. She fell asleep on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder. I sat awake, watching the light from the street lamps flicker across the window. The peace didn't last. Near midnight, the phone rang again. I slipped out from under her and answered quietly. The voice on the other end was low, deliberate. Tell your daughter to stop talking, it said, or she won't get another chance. The line went dead before I could speak. I stood there for a long time, the receiver cold against my ear, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I hung up and looked back at her sleeping form. She looked so young, so tired. The storm outside had only just begun, and now it was coming for both of us. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, the phone still on the table like a threat that could ring again. Outside, rain began to fall, a soft, steady rhythm against the windows. Each drop felt like a heartbeat counting down to something I couldn't yet name. When the first light of dawn touched the curtains, I stood and stretched my aching legs. Evelyn was still asleep on the couch, curled up under a thin blanket. Her face, without the tension of the day before, looked so much like the child I used to carry on my hip. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered her name. She stirred, blinking herself awake. "Is it morning already?" "Yes," I said softly. "You have a meeting today." Her eyes filled with dread. "The board," I nodded. "You don't have to go." "Yes, I do," she said, sitting up. "If I don't face them, they'll decide without me." I poured her coffee. "Then we'll go together." She looked at me in surprise. "You don't have to." "I do," I said firmly. "They need to see you're not alone." For a moment, her composure cracked. "I don't deserve you," I smiled faintly. "Mothers don't keep score." By 9 o'clock, reporters had gathered outside her gate again. When we stepped out, the flash of cameras was blinding. People shouted her name, questions overlapping. Evelyn kept her chin high, one hand gripping mine. We got into Daniel's car and drove through the crowd. The Foundation's headquarters loomed ahead, sharp against the morning light. As we walked in, whispers rippled through the lobby. Employees glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Evelyn's heels clicked steadily across the floor, each sound a small act of defiance. In the boardroom, the tension was thick enough to taste. 10 people sat around a long glass table. Their faces were polished masks of outrage and fear. At the head of the table sat Mr. Hale, the chairman, a man with silver hair and eyes like a winter storm. "Ms. Montgomery," he said, his tone cool, "you've put us in a difficult position." Evelyn met his gaze. "I know. You built your image on a false narrative," he continued. "Donors trusted that story. Now, because of your little confession, we're facing an investigation. You've jeopardized everything." She didn't flinch. "The truth doesn't jeopardize anything. Lies do." "Spare us your moral lecture," another board member snapped. "You lied for years. You took millions under that lie." Daniel stepped forward. "She's not the only one who benefited from that story. The board used it to attract sympathy, to build the brand. You all knew." Murmurs filled the room. Mr. Hale's glare could have frozen the air. "You're out of line, Mr. Clark." I watched the faces around the table, the tightening jaws, the shifting glances. Power makes people forget they're human. Finally, Evelyn spoke again. "I'll resign if that's what it takes, but I won't apologize for telling the truth." Her words hung in the silence that followed. Then Hale smiled, thin and cruel. "That won't be enough. There are contracts, sponsorships we'll lose because of this scandal. The foundation could collapse. Unless," he paused. "Unless what?" she asked. "Unless you sign over your position, your shares, and the rights to the foundation's name. We'll continue the work under new leadership. You'll make a statement saying you're stepping back for personal reasons." Quietly. I could see her hands trembling. "You're asking me to erase myself again." "I'm asking you to protect what you claim to care about," he said smoothly. "If you don't, we'll make sure every media outlet in the city buries you and your mother both." The room went still. Evelyn froze. I felt my stomach twist, the blood draining from my face. "Are you threatening us?" I asked quietly. Hale turned to me with mock politeness. "I'm giving your daughter a choice." Evelyn's voice broke. "You can't do that." "I can," he said, "and I will." Daniel stepped forward, fury in his eyes. "You can't blackmail her in front of witnesses." "Witnesses?" Hale smirked. "Who would believe any of you?" The air seemed to tight. For a second, no one moved. Then Evelyn's chair scraped back. She stood, shaking. "You want the foundation?" she said. "Take it, but you won't bury me, and you won't touch her." He laughed softly. "You think you still have a choice?" That was when the door burst open. A young woman entered, breathless, holding a phone. "Sir, the live stream, someone leaked the meeting. It's broadcasting right now." Every face in the room turned white. Hale snatched the phone from her hand. On the screen, the video played, his voice clear as crystal. "You and your mother both." The board erupted. Shouts, confusion, scrambling. Evelyn turned to Daniel, eyes wide. "Did you?" He shook his head. "No." Then, from the hallway, a familiar voice rang out. "Actually, I did." We turned. Margaret stood in the doorway, calm and pale, the woman who had played my ghost. She held another phone in her hand, still recording. Hale's face went red. "I'm done lying," she said simply. "You told me to play a role. You said it was for a good cause. But watching her tell the truth yesterday reminded me who the real liar was." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Margaret placed the phone on the table and walked out. The chaos that followed was indescribable. Board members shouting, cameras flashing as reporters outside burst into the room. Hale's threats dissolved into noise. Evelyn stood in the center of it all, unmoving, as if she were watching a storm break after years of drought. I took her hand. She didn't look at me, just squeezed gently. When we finally stepped outside, the sunlight felt sharp and cold. Reporters swarmed us again, shouting questions. She didn't answer. We walked straight through them, hand in hand, two women walking out of a story that had almost destroyed them. Daniel caught up to us at the car. "The leak is everywhere already," he said. "They're calling her brave again. Some are calling it a coup. Hale's finished." Evelyn looked at me, dazed. "I didn't plan any of this." "I know," I said, "but maybe life decided to tell the truth for you." We drove home in silence. The city lights blurred outside the window, streaks of gold and red. Evelyn leaned her head against the glass, exhausted. When we reached the house, she turned to me and said, "You were right, Mom. The truth has teeth." I smiled faintly. "Yes, but it also knows how to heal." That night, after she fell asleep, I sat by the window again, listening to the quiet. For the first time in years, there was no distance between us. No lies, no ghosts. And though I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, I felt something new rising in my chest. Not fear, not anger, but a slow, steady peace. The kind that comes only after the storm has passed. The next morning was the first in a long time that didn't begin with dread. The house was still, filled with the faint smell of coffee and rain-soaked air drifting through the open window. I woke early, before the city began to stir, and sat at the kitchen table watching the soft light stretch across the floor. Evelyn was still asleep upstairs. Her breathing had finally evened out in the early hours, a sound that reminded me of her childhood naps on my lap. The newspaper lay folded beside the kettle. I almost didn't open it. Part of me wanted to pretend the world outside didn't exist yet, but curiosity won. The front page was covered with her face again, this time beneath the headline, "Montgomery exposes corruption within her own foundation." I read every word. They praised her courage, dissected her past, speculated about her future. There were photos of Hale being escorted from the building, his expression a mask of rage. The board had voted to remove him permanently. The foundation's funds were frozen, but donations were pouring in from people inspired by her honesty. At the bottom of the page was a small quote from Evelyn's speech after the meeting. "The truth may break you, but lies will bury you." I smiled faintly. That was my daughter. The sound of footsteps drew my eyes to the stairs. Evelyn appeared, wearing a loose sweater and holding a mug. Her hair was messy, her eyes tired but calm. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "Habit, I suppose." She poured herself more coffee and sat opposite me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was no tension, only quiet like the air after thunder. "Daniel called this morning," she said. "They want me to come in for a final statement. The legal team says the foundation will survive, but I won't be part of it." "Do you want to be?" She shook her head. "No, I think it's time I build something honest, even if it's smaller." "That's a good start." She traced her finger along the rim of her cup. "I thought the truth would destroy me, but now that it's out, it feels like I can finally breathe." "That's how it works," I said. "It hurts before it heals." She smiled weakly. "You sound like you've done this before." I chuckled softly. "Living long enough gives you practice." We sat in companionable silence. Outside, the street was quiet except for the occasional car passing. Somewhere nearby, a bird began to sing. Evelyn broke the silence again. "I've been thinking about something. The people who will lose their jobs because of all this, the staff, the volunteers, they don't deserve that. I want to start a new project, smaller, community-based, real help. No branding, no cameras, just people doing good work." "That sounds right," I said, "and maybe this time you won't have to pretend who you are to do it." She nodded. "I want you to be part of it." I blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you have more sense than any of those executives I used to listen to. And the people will help, they'll listen to you." I felt my throat tighten. "You really mean that?" She smiled. "I do. You've always been the one who understood what it means to build something from nothing." I didn't know what to say. For years I had imagined being forgotten, erased. Now she was handing me a place in her future. "Let's take it slow," I said, "one step at a time." "Agreed." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was steady. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting her life. I felt present, real, necessary. The rest of the morning passed quietly. We cooked breakfast together, pancakes and fruit, the way she used to like when she was small. The kitchen filled with warmth and the smell of butter. At one point, she laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years. It filled the house like sunlight. Later, while washing dishes, I noticed something outside the window. A dark car parked across the street. Two men sat inside, not moving. My stomach tightened. "Evelyn," I said softly. She joined me at the window, her expression hardened. "Reporters? Maybe, but they're not holding cameras." She exhaled slowly. "Hale still has connections. He won't forgive this. What can he do now? It's over." "Not for men like him," she said. "He'll try to make it seem like I orchestrated the whole thing to destroy him. If he can't silence me with threats, he'll use rumors." I looked at her. "Then we stay careful. Keep our heads down for a while." She nodded, though her eyes stayed fixed on the car. I won't run again, Mom. I'm done hiding. I know, I said, but bravery doesn't mean walking straight into the fire. She smiled faintly. You always did have a saying for everything. I shrugged. Mothers collect them like receipts. By afternoon, the car was gone. We both pretended not to keep checking the window. That evening, Daniel came over. He looked tired but relieved. The board is finished, he said. They're calling it a structural reorganization, but everyone knows what it means. The new interim director reached out to thank you both. Evelyn poured him coffee and asked, and Hale? Under investigation, turns out he moved some of the foundation's money into offshore accounts. Margaret gave the press the documents. I couldn't help but smile. Good for her. She disappeared afterward, Daniel added. No one's seen her since yesterday. Evelyn frowned. Maybe she just wants peace. Maybe, he said, but the tone in his voice made me wonder if he believed it. When Daniel left, the house felt quiet again. Evelyn went to bed early, exhausted from days of crisis. I stayed downstairs, staring at the window. The dark street stared back. I thought about Margaret, about the guilt that must have driven her to expose everything. Maybe truth doesn't just heal, maybe it also consumes. Before going to bed, I wrote a note and placed it on the counter for Evelyn. The truth has begun to work. Sleep tomorrow will be better. But deep down, something in me knew the storm hadn't truly passed. The air outside still felt heavy waiting. And as I turned off the light, I saw something glint on the porch, a piece of folded paper weighed down by a stone. When I stepped closer, I realized it was a photo. Evelyn and Margaret, standing together at a gala, smiling. Across the back, in neat handwriting, were 4 words, "The past isn't finished." I didn't sleep that night either. The photograph lay on my nightstand, its edges curling slightly under the weight of the air. Every time I closed my eyes, the words on the back burned through my mind. The past isn't finished. I got up before dawn and made tea, more for the comfort of holding something warm than for the taste. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock in the hallway. I studied the photo again. It had been taken 2 years ago, judging by the style of Evelyn's hair and the date stamped faintly in the corner. She was smiling in that easy, practiced way of hers. Margaret stood beside her, also smiling, but now that I looked closer, her eyes seemed elsewhere, already afraid. Who had left it? Why now? When I heard footsteps on the stairs, I slipped the photo under the folded newspaper. Evelyn appeared, still in her robe, rubbing her eyes. You're up early again, she said. I could say the same for you. She smiled faintly. Habit, bad dreams. I hesitated. About what? About the foundation. About Hale. About everything that's still hanging over us. She sat at the table, her hands cradling the mug I poured for her. You ever notice how the truth doesn't really end anything? It just opens more doors you thought were walls. I nodded. That's because people build new lies to cover the old ones. Her eyes drifted to the window. Maybe, but I'm done building. The words comforted me more than I expected. For the first time, she sounded sure of something, not of control, not of image, but of herself. By mid-morning, Daniel arrived again, his expression tense. You both need to see this, he said, dropping a folded newspaper onto the table. The headline read, Leaked documents suggest Montgomery's confession was staged. Below it, a grainy photo of me and Evelyn leaving the foundation 2 days ago. The caption twisted everything, mother and daughter reunion orchestrated for publicity. Evelyn's face drained of color. They're saying it was fake? Yes, Daniel said grimly. Anonymous sources claim you planned the whole thing with Margaret to frame Hale and relaunch your image. That's insane, I said. It doesn't matter, Daniel replied. If people believe it, it might as well be true. Evelyn buried her face in her hands. He's doing this. Hale's pulling strings from behind the scenes. Probably, Daniel said, but he won't risk open retaliation. He's under investigation. He'll use whispers instead. I took the photo from under the paper and placed it in front of them. Then explain this. Evelyn looked at it, her eyes widening. Where did you get this? It was on the porch last night. Daniel examined it closely. This was taken at the Silverlight Gala, the night before the foundation announced the partnership with Hale's investors. Look at the date on the back. It's the same week Margaret stopped volunteering and vanished for months. Evelyn frowned. What are you saying? He hesitated. I'm saying maybe Margaret wasn't just your stand-in. Maybe she was someone Hale used long before you met her. The thought hit me like cold water. You think he planted her? It would make sense. A ready-made mother figure for your narrative, someone who could be controlled. Evelyn stood and began pacing. Number Margaret was kind. She looked after me when I was young in the program. She couldn't have been part of something like that. People do strange things for security, Daniel said quietly, or out of fear. Evelyn stopped, her voice trembling. If she was part of this from the beginning, that means my entire story, my whole life was built on his manipulation. I went to her and took her hands. Then it's time to reclaim it. She looked at me, eyes fierce now. We find her, Margaret. If she's still alive, she'll know the truth. Daniel nodded. I can reach out to a contact in the press. Maybe someone has seen her since she disappeared. He made a few calls while we waited. The minutes dragged. I kept my eyes on the window, half expecting that dark car to return. Finally, Daniel hung up. She's in a hospital, he said. Outside the city, private ward under another name. They say she was brought in 2 days ago. Head trauma, no visitors. Evelyn's voice was a whisper. Head trauma? They didn't say how it happened. We didn't need to guess. Within an hour, we were in Daniel's car again, the road stretching gray under a low sky. Evelyn stared out the window the whole way, silent. I wanted to say something to prepare her, but what could I say? The world has already taken too much from you. The truth might take the rest. When we reached the hospital, a nurse led us down a quiet corridor. The smell of disinfectant was sharp, too clean. Room 214. Margaret lay in bed, her head wrapped in white bandages, her skin pale. Machines hummed softly beside her. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard us. Recognition flickered, followed by guilt. Evelyn, she murmured, you came. Evelyn stepped closer, tears in her eyes. What happened to you? Margaret smiled weakly. Accident, they said, car, but it was. I felt my stomach tight. Hale, she nodded faintly. He sent someone, said I'd ruined him. I tried to hide the documents, the recordings, they found me first. Evelyn gripped her hand. Why didn't you come to me? I thought if I stayed quiet, it would end, but it never ends. Her voice cracked. He used me, Evelyn, from the start. I was a prop. He said if I didn't help, he'd destroy the shelter where my sister worked. I'm sorry. Tears ran freely down Evelyn's cheeks. You don't need to be sorry. You tried to fix it. Margaret smiled again, faintly. I did. I sent the photo to your mother. I thought she'd understand what it meant. I took her hand gently. You did the right thing. Her breathing slowed. He's not done, she whispered. There's one more file, in the house, hidden under the floor in his office, everything you need. Before we could ask more, the machines beside her began to beep rapidly. Nurses rushed in, pushing us back. We stood frozen as the noise filled the room. Then, suddenly, silence. Evelyn covered her mouth. Daniel pulled her close, holding her as the doctors shook their heads. We left the hospital hours later, the afternoon sky bruised with storm clouds. No one spoke on the drive back. The world outside blurred into streaks of rain. Finally, Evelyn said, her voice hollow, he killed her. I didn't answer, there was no need. When we reached home, she turned to Daniel. Tomorrow, we find that file, he nodded. And when we do, she said, her eyes dark with resolve, we end this, for good. The first thunder rumbled overhead, low and distant. The storm hadn't passed after all. It had only been waiting for us to return. The rain had not stopped all night. It came down in waves that battered the city like something angry. The sound of it filled every corner of the house, and still none of us spoke. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, a map of Hale's estate glowing on the screen. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his face pale with exhaustion. I stood by the window, watching lightning flash across the skyline. None of us had truly slept since the hospital. Margaret's last words echoed through the silence. There's one more file, under the floor in his office. That sentence had turned into a pulse between us, something alive and insistent. Evelyn broke the quiet first. We go at dawn, she said. Her voice was calm, steady, too calm. Daniel hesitated. His office is in the old estate near the river, right? The one the board used for meetings? Yes. They shut it down after the scandal, but he still keeps it. I know the code to the back gate. Evelyn, if he's still there, then we deal with it, she cut him off. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the laptop. I can't run anymore. Margaret died because of this. We end it. Daniel looked at me as if asking silently whether I could stop her. But I saw the steel in her eyes, the same stubborn light that had carried her out of poverty, that had once terrified me and made me proud in equal measure. You're not going alone, I said. She turned toward me. Mom, I can't let you. You can't stop me, I said gently. If this ends tonight, I'm seeing it through. She didn't argue again. By dawn, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. The streets were slick and empty as we drove toward the river. The world looked washed out, colorless. Evelyn sat in the front seat, silent, staring straight ahead. Daniel drove, his jaw set. I sat in the back, my hand resting on the tin box in my bag, the one that held her old letter. I had brought it without knowing why, maybe as a charm, maybe as a reminder of who she had been before all this began. The Hale estate appeared through the fog like something out of a memory, gray stone, iron gates, rows of trees bending under the weight of the storm. The sign at the front read under investigation, no entry, but the padlock on the side gate had already been broken. Evelyn punched in a code on a rusted keypad. The lock clicked open. Inside, the air was damp and heavy. The office was on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway lined with portraits of men who had built empires on other people's dreams. The silence inside the house was unnerving, even our footsteps seemed too loud. Evelyn stopped in front of the door marked Private Office, R. Hale. She hesitated only a second before pushing it open. The room smelled faintly of cologne and old paper. Bookshelves lined the walls. The desk was large, immaculate, as if waiting for him to return. Daniel began searching drawers. Evelyn crouched near the far wall, running her hand along the wooden floor. "Margaret said under the floor," she murmured, "which means a hollow space." She tapped gently with her knuckles until the sound changed, a soft, dull echo. She pried up one of the floorboards with the edge of a ruler. Beneath it lay a small metal box, dusty but intact. My breath caught. "That's it." Evelyn lifted it out carefully and placed it on the desk. The lock was simple. Daniel picked it open with a paperclip from his pocket. Inside were several USB drives, a stack of papers, and a small black notebook. She opened the notebook first. The handwriting was Hale's, precise, slanted. The entries were meticulous records of meetings, names, amounts, but it was the margins that froze us. Notes scrawled in haste like reminders: use Margaret for press coverage, control narrative, Nia Montgomery, liability. My stomach turned. Evelyn flipped to the last page. The entry was dated 2 weeks ago. If the truth surfaces, remove loose ends. M and D first. Evelyn's voice was barely audible. M and D, Margaret and Daniel. Daniel swore softly. He knew. And then we heard it, the creak of a floorboard downstairs. Evelyn's head snapped up. Another sound followed, slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs. Daniel motioned for us to stay quiet. He crossed to the light switch and turned it off. The room fell into shadow. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Evelyn's breathing quickened. I reached for her hand. She squeezed it hard. A shape appeared in the doorway, a tall man in a dark coat, his face hidden by the light from the hall. "Going somewhere?" The voice was unmistakable. "Hale." He stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind him. "I should have known you'd come here," he said. "Curiosity always runs in your family." His eyes flicked to me, and for a moment his smile turned cruel. "Mother and daughter, both too sentimental for your own good." Evelyn's voice was steady, though her hands shook. "It's over, Hale. We found your records. Everyone will know what you did." He laughed softly. "You think anyone cares? You think a few notes in a box will change anything? The world loves its martyrs, Evelyn, but it loves its villains more." Daniel stepped forward. "Walk away. The police already have your name." Hale's hand slipped into his coat pocket. The faint metallic glint made my blood run cold. "Don't," I said quickly. "You don't have to do this." He looked at me then, his eyes hard as glass. "I do, because people like you never stay quiet." Lightning flashed outside, throwing the room into white for a split second. In that moment, Evelyn moved. She grabbed the metal box and flung it toward him. It struck his arm and the gun went off, the sound deafening in the small space. Glass shattered. I felt the sting of shards on my cheek. Evelyn dropped to the floor. Daniel lunged at Hale, knocking him into the desk. The gun slid across the room. I grabbed it before I could think. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold it steady. "Mom!" Evelyn shouted. But Hale was already moving again, his hand reaching for the weapon. The next sound was a thunderclap, outside or from the gun, I couldn't tell. The recoil jolted through my arms. The room filled with the smell of smoke and metal. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Hale fell backward, eyes wide, a dark stain spreading across his chest. The gun clattered from my hand. Evelyn crawled toward me, tears streaking down her face. "Mom, are you okay? You're bleeding." I touched my cheek and felt only a small cut. "I'm fine," I whispered. "It's over." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Daniel picked up the box from the floor. "We need to go, now." Evelyn nodded, still trembling. She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door. We left the house without looking back, the storm outside swallowing the sound of our footsteps. By the time we reached the car, the rain had started again, harder this time, relentless. Evelyn turned to me, her voice breaking. "You saved us." I looked at her, then at the dark road ahead. "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped what should have ended years ago." As the car pulled away, lightning split the sky again. The Hale estate vanished behind us, a silhouette swallowed by the storm. And though I told myself it was over, a part of me knew that truth doesn't die that easily. It lingers in blood, in memory, in the silence that follows the shot. The rain followed us all the way back into the city, a steady curtain of gray that blurred everything outside the car windows. None of us spoke for the first 30 minutes. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Evelyn stared straight ahead, her face pale, her lips pressed together. I sat in the back seat, the tin box on my lap, still warm from where I had held it. Every few minutes the gunshot replayed in my mind, the sound, the recoil, the look on Hale's face as he fell. I had seen death before in hospitals in the slow dimming of strangers' eyes, but this was different. This was something I had caused. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was low and deliberate. "We can't go home, not yet." Evelyn turned toward him slowly. "Why not?" "The police will find the body. When they do, your name will come up. Mine too. We need time to get ahead of this." Her voice shook. "It was self-defense." "It doesn't matter," he said. "Hale had money, power, friends, and places that will protect his version of the truth long after he's gone." She looked back at me, her eyes full of fear. "Mom, we did the right thing, didn't we?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say that what we had done had saved us, that truth had finally won. But the words caught in my throat. "We did what we had to," I said quietly. "And sometimes that has to be enough." Daniel drove toward the docks, where the old warehouse district met the river. The rain made the streets gleam under the streetlights. He pulled into a deserted parking lot and killed the engine. "Here," he said, opening the glove box. Inside was a small hard drive and a burner phone. "We'll back up everything in the box here. The files, the recordings. If something happens, the truth still gets out." Evelyn nodded numbly and handed him the USBs from Hale's box. He connected them to the drive and started the transfer. The small screen flickered, progress bars inching forward. I looked out at the river, swollen with rain, the water black and restless. Somewhere in that sound I could hear the echo of Margaret's voice. "He's not done." When the upload finished, Daniel handed the hard drive to me. "Keep this safe," he said. "If anything happens to me or Evelyn, you get this to the press." I nodded, though my hands trembled when I took it. "What about the gun?" He hesitated. "We'll get rid of it." Evelyn's eyes widened. "No, we should tell the police." "They won't believe you," Daniel said sharply. "Not with your history, not with the headlines already twisting everything. Right now you're the perfect villain in their story." Her shoulders slumped. "So what do? We disappear for a while," he said. "Let them find the truth without us standing in their way." Evelyn leaned back against the seat and covered her face with her hands. "I'm so tired of running from stories other people write." I reached forward and touched her arm. "Then stop running. Let the truth walk for you this time." For a long time, none of us moved. The rain slowed, turning into a mist that hung low over the water. Finally, Daniel started the engine again. "I'll take you somewhere safe," he said. "A friend has a cabin north of the city. No one will find you there." We drove for hours. The city lights faded, replaced by the dark stretch of forest roads. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a heavy, humid silence. By dawn, we reached the cabin, a small wooden house surrounded by trees, its windows shuttered. Daniel unlocked the door and turned on a single lamp. The place smelled of pine and old books. Evelyn dropped her bag by the couch and sank onto it. I followed her, sitting beside her in the dim light. Daniel looked around, checking the locks, the windows. "You'll be safe here," he said, "at least for a few days." "What about you?" I asked. He gave a faint smile. "I'll go back, handle what I can. If they trace the security cameras or the car, I'll take the heat. You two stay out of sight." Evelyn stood. "Daniel, no," he raised a hand. "You need someone on the outside. If Hale's people start spinning this, someone has to be there to steer it." Evelyn's voice broke. "You'll be arrested." "I'll tell them I was investigating him," he said. "It won't be a lie." She stepped closer and hugged him tightly. "Be careful," she whispered. He nodded and left without another word. When the sound of his car faded, the silence in the cabin grew louder. I made tea again because it was something to do. Evelyn sat at the window, staring into the trees. Hours passed. Neither of us spoke much. The woods outside were so still it felt as if time itself had stopped. Around noon, the phone on the counter buzzed. I jumped. Evelyn grabbed it. It was Daniel. She put it on speaker. His voice was low, urgent. "They found Hale's body." Evelyn swallowed hard. "What are they saying?" "They're calling it a robbery gone wrong for now, but that won't hold. They'll dig." "What about you?" "I'm fine. But Evelyn, they found your bracelet near the office floor. You must have dropped it." Her hand flew to her wrist. "No, I'm sorry," he said. "It's only a matter of time before they trace you. You need to be ready." "Ready for what?" "For the world to come looking." The line went dead. Evelyn sank back into the chair, pale. "I dropped it when the shot." I knelt beside her. "We'll figure it out." Her eyes filled with tears. "I tried to fix everything, and now I've destroyed it again." "No," I said, gripping her hands. "You face the truth. Sometimes that's the only thing left to do. Outside, thunder rumbled again, distant but steady. The forest seemed to shiver with it. Evelyn looked out the window. Do you think the truth ever stops chasing us? I followed her gaze into the dark woods. No, I said quietly, but maybe one day it will finally stop needing to. The cabin fell silent again. The rain began to fall softly on the roof, a lullaby for people who had run too far from everything they were trying to find. And though I didn't say it aloud, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was only the pause before the world decided what to do with us next. Morning came quietly to the cabin, slow and hesitant, as if the sun itself was unsure whether to return. I woke to the smell of rain-soaked wood and coffee. Evelyn was already up, sitting by the window in her old sweater, her hair falling loose over her shoulders. She looked younger somehow, though the shadows under her eyes said otherwise. Outside, the forest shimmered with leftover rain, drops sliding from leaves like tiny mirrors. The silence felt heavier than it should have, too perfect, too still. She didn't look at me when she spoke. I dreamed about her last night. Margaret? She nodded. She was standing in the garden from when I was a kid. She didn't say anything, just looked at me, and then she smiled. It wasn't sad, though. It was like she wanted to tell me I could rest now. I poured her coffee and sat across from her. Maybe she did. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the cup. Do you think that's how forgiveness works? People come back to tell you it's okay? I smiled faintly. I think forgiveness doesn't belong to the dead. It belongs to the living, to the ones who have to keep going. She looked down into her cup, her reflection rippling in the surface. I don't know if I can forgive myself yet. Then start with forgiving her, I said. She made mistakes, but she tried to fix them in the end. So did you? She nodded slowly. The light through the window caught her face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was peace in her expression. The day passed in small, quiet tasks. I cleaned the kitchen. She organized the files from Hale's box, labeling each one. Sometimes she'd stop and stare at a page for a long time, then slip it into a pile marked evidence. It was as if she was building order from chaos, piece by piece. By afternoon, we heard the low hum of an engine outside. Evelyn froze. Daniel's car appeared at the edge of the clearing, mud streaked along the sides. He stepped out, his coat soaked, his face pale. I opened the door before he could knock. They know, he said simply. Evelyn stood, her voice trembling. The police? He nodded. They found your bracelet. They're calling you in for questioning. It's only a matter of time before they get a warrant. She sank into the chair. So that's it. After everything, I end up the villain again. Daniel stepped closer. Not this time. The files, we can use them. I sent copies to 3 reporters already. They'll release them tonight. Hale's corruption, the threats, everything. Once it's public, they can't paint you as the criminal. I felt something in my chest loosen, just slightly. You took a risk doing that. Smiled faintly. It's worth it. The world deserves to see what truth costs. Evelyn stood, her hands trembling. So what now? Now we wait, Daniel said. If the story goes live before they find us, you'll walk in on your own terms. If not, he didn't finish the sentence. The 3 of us sat in silence. The rain had stopped, but thunder still rolled faintly in the distance. Evelyn reached for my hand, then Daniel's. I'm done running, she said. If this is what it means to face it, then I'll face it. Her voice was steady now, not defiant but resolved. As evening fell, the forest began to hum with crickets. The air outside was heavy with the smell of wet earth. Inside, the only light came from the small television in the corner, its antenna flickering. We watched as the news began. At first, it was the usual noise: politics, weather, economy. Then, just before the hour turned, the screen cut to the anchor's face. This evening, newly leaked documents reveal financial crimes tied to philanthropist Richard Hale and several members of his foundation's board. Evelyn's hand covered her mouth. The screen filled with images, scanned files, signatures, dates, Hale's name printed over and over. And then her face appeared, taken from the day she told her story to the press weeks ago. She is now considered a whistleblower in the investigation, the reporter continued. Authorities have confirmed the authenticity of the materials. Evelyn let out a shaky breath that turned into a laugh, half disbelief, half release. Daniel leaned forward, his head in his hands. I just sat there, feeling the weight of months, years, generations lift, if only slightly. When the report ended, she turned to me. We did it. I shook my head softly. You did it. Her eyes glistened. No, Mom, I couldn't have without you. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, full of light. I realized I hadn't taken a full breath in years. Outside, the storm finally began to clear. The clouds broke, and a strip of orange light spilled through the trees. Evelyn stood at the doorway, watching the horizon. This isn't over, is it? She said quietly. No, I admitted, but maybe it's not supposed to be. Maybe the truth just keeps walking beside you to remind you where you've been. She smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth trembling. That sounds like something you'd say. Maybe I've had time to practice. Daniel came to stand beside her, the three of us framed in the doorway, the air cool and new. The sun slipped lower, staining the world in gold. I thought of Margaret then, her soft smile in the hospital bed, her voice fading with regret and courage. I thought of the little girl who used to run barefoot through my kitchen, sticky with jam, asking questions about everything. And I thought of the woman beside me now, scarred but standing. Maybe that was what truth really meant, not a revelation, not a weapon, but a mirror. One that didn't lie even when you wished it would. Evelyn turned to me. What now? I took her hand. Now we live, quietly, honestly, that's enough. We stayed there until the last of the light disappeared. The forest sighed with the first sounds of night. Somewhere far away, a siren echoed, soft, fading, moving toward the city we'd left behind. And for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. Because the truth, for all its noise and pain, had finally fallen silent inside me. The world would write its headlines, tell its stories, twist its meanings. But we had our own version now, one built not on lies, not on fear, but on what survived after everything else was gone. As the stars began to rise, Evelyn rested her head on my shoulder. Daniel stood a little apart, watching the road, the faint light of his phone blinking in his hand. Then the screen went dark. No more running. No more pretending. Only the sound of the wind through the trees, the soft rhythm of breathing, and the fragile, undeniable weight of peace. That's how truth ends, not with a shout, not with a verdict, but with a whisper that says, finally, you're free to begin again.